Excellence.
Excellency Mr. Antoine Felix Tshisekedi Tshilombo, current Chairman of the African Union, President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished Heads of Delegation, Honorable Ministers, Madam Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Chief Executives of the Regional Economic Communities, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, commissioners, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. At last, we are meeting here physically.
Cette ville hospitalière, foisonnante de cultures, d'art et d'attraits patrimoniaux historiques et évocateurs d'une beauté jamais ternie par le temps. Excellence, Monsieur le Président Antoine Félix Tshisekedi, au moment où vous allez passer le témoin, permettez-moi de vous exprimer mes vifs remerciements et de vous adresser mes chaleureux compliments pour l'immense travail abattu à la tête de notre organisation continentale tout au long de l'année écoulée. Je salue l'excellente expérience de travail convivial, fructueux et intense que nous avions eue avec vous et sous votre leadership. Excellence, Monsieur Macky Sall,
Senegal and the incoming chairman of our union, I welcome you and wish you every success during your term. Your pragmatism, your sense of method, your determination, your ambitions for Africa raise real hopes that the project initiated by your predecessors will find a new impetus. Despite the difficult economic and health circumstances, I wish you full success in your chairmanship. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 pandemic has challenged mankind deep down and it's its very conscience. We cannot, when we are meeting physically for the first time since the outbreak of the pandemic, avoid asking ourselves about ourselves, our doubts, our anxieties, our concerns for our organization and for our Africa. Two major scourges, that is COVID-19 and terrorism at the continental level, must add to our intrinsic fragilities that the two scourges have exposed. On COVID-19, the champion in this field, President Cyril Ramaphosa, will present to you the essence of our efforts over the past 2 years, as well as the guidelines of our strategy of resistance and future triumph against the devastating pandemic. Two major players will be called upon to play a leading role in this strategy. Africa CDC, whose operationalization is in progress, it will occupy in our institutional landscape the status of a specialized agency endowed with the autonomy of action dictated by the nature of its mission while remaining firmly anchored within the continental organization. The African Medicines Agency, AMA, is preparing to play its part in this fight to promote public health, the life and well-being of Africans. The acquisition of vaccines and their manufacture in Africa seem to be the major points of this strategy. The impact of COVID-19 resulted in a contraction in growth of 2.1% in 2020 and an increase in the debt ratio by 10 points of GDP. Africa, due to the insufficiency of external financing to compensate for the low rate of its savings, will not be able to regain the dynamics of its growth before the onset of COVID-19. Active in the mobilization of financial resources for the continent, both by the reduction, indeed the debt cancellation, and by the mobilization of the special drawing rights, our strategy will focus on the identification, indeed the invention of other innovative sources of financing and reducing the harmful effects of the pandemic on our economies with their well-known structural weaknesses. Our great challenge is and remains in this area the realization of autonomy in the financing of our own development through an energetic fight against illicit capital flows, through the reform of our fiscal policies, and through the acceleration of the establishment of African financial institutions. On the expansion of terrorism, everybody is aware that everybody is aware of the scourge in assuming the unprecedented proportion at the continental level, formerly confined to two small areas. The north of the Sahel and the Horn of Africa is now extending its tentacles to the south of the Sahel, in the center and indeed to the northern regions of the continent. The security situation of the continent today is deeply marked by the metastasis of terrorism and the dangerous resurgence of unconstitutional changes of government. Furthermore, two phenomena establish causal links known. On one hand, very often we find the pretext in the significance, and expansion on the other hand, the necessary fight against the latter produces the illusion that the second is the answer to the proven failures in the fight against the first one. The security situation on the continent calls for a real new approach, which should question our peace and security architecture and its correlation with the new destabilizing factors in Africa. In the absence of this burst of intelligence and decisions, I have serious questions about the future of our flagship project on silencing the guns within the fixed timeline. The dangerous expansion of evil demands stronger international mobilization and a greater inter-African solidarity, which is more fruitful, more concrete, and more active. It is particularly disconcerting to see here and there the vague desire of non-African commitments to support the African countries under attack, while the tenuous ray of African solidarity only allows us to see the immensity of the African paralysis in the face of the burning neighboring houses. The context marked by the two scourges would have made it possible to glimpse the rays of hope if the world were not one where national selfishness, inward-looking attitudes, and the collapse of the values of solidarity and generosity, the fruits of our common humanity, visibly tarnished. The profound and irrefutable truth, however, is that no part of the international community can be reassured about its fate when all the others parts are not. The crisis of multilateralism exists, is real and significant. Obviously, there are many attempts to approach Africa, and this no doubt indicates a growing interest in the continent. But this interest has not yet frankly been translated into a substantial development-centric consideration in favor of Africa. The idea for a time-reflective Marshall Plan for the continent has gradually vanished. I am not far from thinking intensely that such a plan, however necessary, will never come from the outside world. Here, more than ever before, the African leadership is strongly challenged for an awakening for the mobilization of endogenous resources that reveals the immense potential of the continent. There is no salvation except in this African direction for Africa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the context fairly depicted in broad outlines is nevertheless the framework within which, with the support of most of you, we have been able to deploy ourselves by making, to the best of our ability, use of the assets at our disposal. The redeployment in such a context enabled us to put our finger on the areas of pain that I considered useful to expose to you explicitly and candidly. In doing so, I trust your wisdom, your sagacity, and your immense experience to listen to me on this matter and take the appropriate decisions, those that all the stakeholders of the continent expect you to take. At the forefront of the constraints experienced are the legal and political limits. We have, of course, launched the institutional reform of our organization. It has made it possible to make significant progress towards improving our internal management and efficiency. I wish here to pay deserved tribute to President Paul Kagame, who was champion and architect, as well as the men and women, including the head of the reform unit, who supported him in this endeavor. In spite of the undeniable progress, the reform remains silent on the situation of notorious legal fragility of the Commission and its chairperson. Their powers and competences remain the same as before the reform. How do such powers and competences reduce the leadership role of the Commission? Two major questions constrain the Commission to a rather modest role in the African decision-making process. The first is the narrow reading of the concept of subsidiarity. We certainly need to clarify better the relationship of subsidiarity and complementarity between the regional economic communities and the continental organization. Beyond, however, to declare here and there that the decision of an organ of the AU, in this case the Peace and Security Council on Mali, should be dependent on the decisions of a regional organization, namely ECOWAS. There is really a big gap. It is important that our summit brings here the necessary clarification to avoid any detrimental drift to the functioning of our political and security architecture. The second problem to consider is the question of the sovereignty of states. This is a protective shield against all sorts of abuses occurring in a member country. A restrictive, even dogmatic reading of the intangible principle of the sovereignty of the member states raises an iron wall against any intervention by the continental organization, either as a preventive measure through early warning or as a remedy when the crisis has broken out. We should not therefore be surprised under these conditions to see the Commission being treated here and there as a simple secretariat of the states. Sovereignty is not unique to our organization, and I know it. All international and regional organizations are facing this. But its force and the restrictive readings to which it is subjected at the AU remain excessive and are detrimental to the full capacity of the organization for initiative and action. This double handicap was not unrelated to the conduct of the Commission to the face of unconstitutional changes of government, a disastrous wave of which has been sweeping in recent times and not only in West Africa. It was, however, clear that such situation was almost inevitable if a certain number of measures and political initiatives were not taken with the desired speed. Solidarity and state sovereignty made any proactive action by the Commission impossible. This situation can only result in a gradual slumber of the role of the leader of the organization at the political and diplomatic levels. On this 20th anniversary of the African Union, a day of renaissance, remembrance, assessment, meditation and projection into the future, I'll call for more inventiveness and the creative spirit to give back to the operational organ of our union greater possibility of action and influence on the political future of our states, in particular when these are in real need for attention. In this effort to awaken the organization, through an inventive reflection of the best modes and models, how can we not question our democratic systems and our peace and security architecture? Have these been able to promote operations ensuring the minimum of good governance, the fight against corruption, nepotism, mismanagement, exclusion? Have they made it possible to fulfill our dream of an Africa where we have silenced the guns? Are we determined enough to reform our Peace and Security Council? Have we mobilized enough efforts for the reform of the United Nations Security Council by opening, when the time comes, a credible corridor for Africa to enter this body in charge of peace in the world? In a word, have our models made it possible to meet the expectations of hundreds of millions of young people and African women burned by the unbearable turpitudes of the political classes with efficiency and ethical values in continual collapse? In other words, have they made it possible to raise the dikes necessary for the easy populism which prepares the ground for coup d'etat and rebellions? there is certainly a vast number of issues, the perceptive, courageous and innovative consideration of which can no longer be deferred. In the constellation of political constraints, how not to deplore the shortcomings in the application of the dual principle of speaking with one voice and African solutions to African problems. We wonder in many specific cases what is the purpose of our decisions in this sphere and many others. In how many situations have we not been led to bitter observation of fact, sometimes more humiliating than embarrassing, of the lack of the imperative need to speak with one voice on our own problems and on those that bring us together with our international partners. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, do not blame me for having taken much of your precious time. My understanding of my duty and of the responsibilities which you have honored me with dictates to me the obligation to always speak to you frankly and in all sincerity, while at the same time confining myself ultimately to your great wisdom. Of course, our agenda has a number of issues to which I will refer and address later on. The Palestinian question and the granting of observer status to the State of Israel is one of those specific issues which I will address later. I would like at this juncture just stress two aspects. I would like that is the first one, the need for a serene debate, far from any attempt to exploit this issue for political purposes, to become aware clearly of the relationship between the unwavering position of the African Union on the cause of the Palestinian people and the recognition of observer status for Israel. Our commitment to supporting the Palestinian people in their legitimate quest for freedom and independence and their inalienable right to the establishment of their own national state alongside the State of Israel, in conformity with the relevant decisions of the African Union and the United Nations based on the principle of two states living together in peace, harmony and mutual respect, and is unchanging and can only continue to grow stronger. The second aspect is my intimate conviction that the observer status granted to Israel in full compliance with the SID criteria, which governs the matter, makes it possible to give our organization more latitude and the possibility of playing its role in the promotion of our decisions on the issue, exactly like the Afro-Arab countries, which have made the recognition of Israel an instrument in the service of peace and the quest for the best ways and means for the confirmation of the principle of two Palestinian and Israeli states living in perfect harmony. The second specific issue relates to our partnerships. The proliferation of these partnerships, a sign of interest in Africa and the dynamism of our continent and its organization, no longer allows us to engage in them without really revisiting our approaches to such partnerships. It is imperative to focus them on concrete, transformative and integrating mega projects in 5 priority areas of peace and energy, infrastructure and energy, climate change, innovative development financing, training of youth and empowerment of women. These projects currently under execution require the mobilization of substantial financial resources to achieve the structural transformation of our economies. This is the only way to achieve inclusive and sustainable growth capable of cushioning the impact of shocks such as financial crisis, the effects of climate change and pandemics. I hope that the summits that we are planning this year with our partners will be decisive moments for the implementation of our vision of international partnerships of Africa with the rest of the world. Such a redefinition of our strategic partnerships constitutes, in my view, a decisive lever for the role of Africa in the design of a new world order in harmony with our hopes. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I now have the honor of requesting His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Congo, to